Yeah, if your values or your mission statement or your vision is just a mouse mat or a poster, it's kind of missing the point. It's a start. It's good that you've thought about things.
Yeah.
But they have to be real. They have to be living things. Your people have to go to work every day knowing that when they take action or do something in the business, that it is in line with those things. And they've got to feel that it's a real thing, actually, that they can contribute to as well.
Ash, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So good to have you, man. Yeah, it's been ages. When was the last time I saw you? Belgium?
Yeah, for a coffee in Belgium randomly in the freezing cold. Maybe 7-8 years ago. No, 2013.
No, 2013. That sounds right.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm excited to have you on the show. I mean, it's always weird when I interview people I know, especially when I start looking in their background. I was like, dude's done quite a lot. He's got quite a bit.
It's all quite random. It's nothing
right. But still, it's really exciting, man. And first of all, like, how are you finding life outside of the military or the army? I had a guest on who tried to explain to me the difference between military and army. And it sounds like civilians and all, have no idea what the difference is. So were you in the army or the military?
Both.
Both.
I mean, the army is part of the military, so
okay,
a bit of both.
Okay.
It's funny you asked that question first because I get asked that quite a lot, as if it's some sort of condition. How have you found the transition? It's like, no, I'm fine. But I recognise, not to make light of it, that for some people transitioning from a career in one particular, whatever it might be, but particularly if you're in a structured sort of government grouping, to leave that into the big bad world where there's so much opportunity can be quite daunting.
Sure, put the microphone just a little bit closer to you.
But I was very lucky.
There he is. Can you hear his voice, people? Can you hear the crisp voice?
But I was very lucky that a lot of my jobs were very international and working with very interesting people in and outside of uniform and outside of government. So my role when I sort of left the military didn't feel like it had actually changed a huge amount. Sure. Still meeting interesting people in interesting places.
But it's crazy though, because you ended up spending 22 years and you only had like a 3-year plan.
Yeah. Well, have you ever had a plan that you've stuck to? Come on, let's be honest. No, I thought in my mind that I would do 3 years in the military, enjoy it, and then I'd get a proper job, in parentheses, whatever that is. Yeah. And just found that I enjoyed it and met really interesting people that were driven and doing incredible things and thought, well, this is actually fun until it's no longer fun. Cool. Or if I run out of lives, then I'll continue. Yeah. So,
we'll talk about that a bit later, about like running out of lives. But when was your first memory of you going, I want to be in the military? Like, I want to join the military?
Well, we had a cadet force at school, which I quite enjoyed, being part of.
Was this before or after you were in the choir?
This was after I was in the choir.
Because you're singing.
Thanks for that. So, at school we had a cadet force, and I quite enjoyed that sort of running around playing soldiers. Yeah. And we were...
For those who don't know, because we've got people listening from all over the world, cadet force is basically open for like youth and younger people to come and experience.
So it's sort of 16 to 18 while you're either in high school or so you're not being paid by the military. Yeah. We're not child soldiers. But it's to teach you leadership and skills that might be of use to you in later life. And I found that quite enjoyable. Yeah. And we were quite unique that the leaders of that group were actually ex-regular soldiers or officers themselves. So they were effectively, wouldn't say talent spotting, but they were looking for people that might have... Yeah, kind of scouting to see if there were people...
it's official. Ash is a spy. I knew it all along.
He's absolutely not. That they would sort of encourage people that they thought might have some of the aptitude to join the military. So I then applied, for a university sponsorship and went through.
Cool. And one of your parents in the military? Did you have any family ancestry in the military?
Not my parents, but my grandparents. My grandfather on my mother's side was a Lancaster bomber navigator. Okay. But he joined just after the war. Yeah. And my grandfather on my father's side was a baker in the Isle of Wight, and he desperately wanted to join the military, but they wouldn't let him because he was providing a service to sort of Portsmouth, Southampton, providing bread. Yeah. So
we can't get you in the military.
He joined the Home Guard. He joined the Home Guard. Okay. And the story goes, whether it's apocryphal or not, anecdotally, he reported one evening when he was on watch that it sounded like a flying motorbike had just flown over his position. Yeah. And they sent him home, thought he was drunk, and it was one of the first V1 rockets.
No way.
Which has a two-stroke engine. It sounds a bit like a flying motorbike.
Okay.
So that was his contribution.
Fair enough, man. Yeah. So you end up, 3-year plan, you end up in this kind of, institution, I guess, or kind of organization, but you're impressed. Like, you kind of realize that actually there's some talented people, smart people, and you can learn quite a bit around there.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I've always luckily found that I'm generally the least clever person in the room, and I love that learning and watching others you know, doing things very well and trying to emulate that leadership. And so in my first 3 years, I joined a unit called the Gurkhas. Okay. So all the soldiers are from Nepal. Okay. So I had to learn Nepali and other things, which is good fun. Yeah.
So peeps, like you're gonna find out Ash is some of the most random stories you'll ever hear.
I know, sorry.
By the way, I'm just gonna say this now, and I don't know if I'm gonna get you into trouble, but one of my fondest memories of us when we first met was at the wedding of Daniela's wedding. Who was, by the way, like half Norwegian, half Mexican, married a half Israeli, half German, and got married in Spain.
Is that too many halves?
Yeah, it's a lot of halves. Yeah. And we were driving towards, like, I think it was the next day in the brunch. And you were like, I think it's used to train, right? You used to train tactics.
I'd recently done some training with learning how to drive cars
That's
safely.
It.
So if you were in countries where you might be, you know, with others that you needed to keep out of dangerous situations. So we did a few maneuvers. I think let's leave it at that. Let's just leave it at that. The hire car insurance was not invalidated.
So you're part of the go. You learn Nepalese.
Yeah. And we traveled to Nepal, learn the culture, learn the language, learn the people, and was very, very honoured to be able to lead, or at least they gave me the impression that I was leading. Cool. Of you know, some Gurkha soldiers in a number of places, including Bosnia. And that was my first.
And how old are you then?
Early 20s.
Early 20s.
Yeah.
And that was that. Did you have any exposure of traveling before that, like extensively, like you'd seen a bit of the world before?
Yeah. So really, you just tried to make fun of me with the choir, but when I joined a cathedral choir when I was 7 or 8, we were quite an internationally sort of flavoured.
You're an award-winning musician, I've heard.
The choir won a number of awards, not me personally. But we travelled around the world singing with the Vienna Boys Choir in America with various choirs and doing big concerts and world premieres and stuff. Not for you.
Come on.
No.
Come on, Ash.
Not today.
Not today. Right, peeps. By the end of today, we're going to get Ash to sing. So at a young age, were you exposed to traveling?
Only through that. My family wasn't a big traveling family, but through the choir, and it just sort of opened my eyes to the idea that there was so much out in the world. And that really, I think, did set me on a path of being fairly international. And my friend network, you're an example of that.
Sure.
We met in, where was it, Spain?
Yeah, it was Spain.
Randomly. It's all been about the connections you make when you travel. So it's been a real feature of my 100%. Life that I enjoy.
What were you most surprised when you started off? When you went off and you started traveling, you started, interacting with people, learning a bit more about the military tactics, and what were you most surprised about the people you met and about yourself?
I think the traveling bug really started way before the military. So I think the traveling lessons is that, make an effort to always speak to as many people as you can. And I hate feeling like a tourist. I hate being in places where I'm doing the touristy things, although you still want to see those things that are iconic, generally where you go to various locations. But I'll always try and eat with the locals, speak to locals, and that's how I've met so many incredible people, and linking, I suppose, that to the military. Some of my dearest friends are through conflicts. I've got some really close Afghan friends that I, trust with my life, and vice versa, because of the shared experiences we've had. And I think, we are all guilty, regardless of, ethnicity or nationality, to presume or judge different cultures or put them into one basket or bucket. I love Afghanistan, for example, and Afghan people. They're very warm, very generous, and same with Pakistan. I spent a lot of time in Central Asia, and absolutely love it.
Haven't you got like a Medal of Honor or something from?
It's not. Yeah, it's not really. It's not.
I'm going to make you squeamish for the whole thing.
It's not the same.
So Ash has gone like, let me read all your awards, Ash.
No. It's an Afghan thing, just because I spent nearly 4 years in Afghanistan trying to support them and help them develop various systems to prevent attacks and things.
Yeah, but it's mad. I know you're a humble guy, and for you it's not probably comfortable to talk about this, but I was looking back at your background. That's why I never normally have notes of guests, but I was just looking at your notes. I was just going, bloody hell, man, like, where do I even start, there's one that you spent 82 months deployed on operations in complex and hostile environments, And I remember the stories you were sharing.
Because nobody wanted me here.
They're trying to get rid of you.
It's very addictive if you're in any kind of role where you're helping others, and I wouldn't limit this absolutely at all to the military, but if you're in aid work or any of these things where you can see everything you do, or most things you do every day, actually making a tangible difference. It's very addictive. Sure. But the trouble is, with many of these environments, the longer you spend in them, the chances of you getting hurt or whatever go up. But
because at one point you became a helicopter pilot. Am I right?
Yeah, that was after the Gurkhas. I did 3 years flying.
Yeah. And is there a story, or is there something about something happened on a helicopter? Did something happen on a helicopter?
Things always happen on helicopters. I've been in a few helicopter incidents.
Yeah. Because one thing I've heard you say, and we're going to have a code word. Okay, we're going to have a code word.
Is this a safe word?
It's a safe word.
What kind of podcast is this? This is not what you briefed me about.
I always say this to my friends who I interview. I'm always careful about what's public knowledge and what's not public knowledge. And so if there's a question I ask and you go, actually, that can't be public knowledge, we're going to say Mississippi or Alabama.
Oh, wait. Okay. Which do you want?
Mississippi.
Okay, good.
Anyway, so because one of the things I remember you telling me, and I also heard you say this in an interview online, was that in times of crisis, when shit hits the fan, that's when actually you shine. That's when you actually come alive, and that's where you feel like you have like an edge, almost like.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I wouldn't say I shine or shone, but I certainly, those are generally the only times in my life where I felt that was where I could add the most value to make the most positive difference. You know, when things are going quite badly wrong, and people then look to you as the leader, because a lot of these things, you know, when a mission or an operation or any kind of activity in business is going well, the leaders shouldn't need to be involved. If they've given clear enough direction about what they want the guys and girls to achieve, they should be able to just let it happen. And that's where, you know, you get the most out of your people. But when things do start going wrong, which invariably they do, and particularly in military, you know, the old adage was, you know, no plan survives contact with the enemy. You know, they have a vote. So the moment you start, you think, right, plan's going well, then it'll not go well.
It reminds me of Mac Tyson's quote, like, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face.
Correct. Yeah, exactly the same. And so when things go very badly wrong, and you know, I've got many friends who are far better at this than I, but you know, I certainly felt that when things have been going wrong, or very serious incidents, you know, in Afghanistan particularly, or Iraq, where you know, big attacks, suicide bombings, and people are getting shot, and you're there to try and minimize further loss of life and protect people. That's when I kind of feel, you know, time slows down. It sounds a silly thing to say, but it sort of feels like in those situations when it's most chaotic, for me, that's when I have the most clarity.
Has that always been the case? Have you always found yourself, like, if you look back at your life, can you think of like incidents that happened around you where you were already?
Not really.
Or do you think you conditioned yourself over time?
No, I think, you know, through the training and the way in which, you know, you're selected and then trained and conditioned, you know, you build resilience. You're taught to think critically about problems and solve, you know, be a problem solver. Yeah. And I think all those things that I learned in the military, you know, I've applied in my commercial life as a consultant, as a coach and a mentor, etc. All the challenges are generally identical. Yeah. You know, the enemy is not an enemy necessarily in commercial space, but it is your competitor. It is the disruptor that's going to try and, you know, take advantage of a market advantage or share. So all these lessons are, I think,
transferable.
They transfer. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And do you remember the first time when you went from theory practice to on the field? Like when you were practicing shooting weapons, when you know, tactics, and then suddenly you were in the field, like in the live ammunitions rounds. Do you remember that adrenaline, or were you by then already kind of like, okay, we're ready now?
I think you can do a lot of training, and as realistic as it is, unless somebody's actually shooting back at you and you're taking casualties, or you're a casualty, that's the first time it really becomes very real. So I did how many years? I guess 8 or so years in the military before I sort of had my first really big sort of gun battle, I suppose, when I was shot and the guy standing next to me was killed and 3 others were wounded. That was quite shocking. And because it was such a shock, you know, I know that you know, in hindsight, I wish I'd done things differently as the leader. You know, I was still trying to command things, but I would, you know, there's a moment where you're in that sort of, God, this wasn't what I was expecting, or this wasn't supposed to happen. Yeah. And that does knock you, and, you know, physically it knocks you over, obviously, if you get shot. But
do you remember the sensation of it?
Yeah, I do very well. It's have you ever had a like a puncture wound, even if you stepped on a drawing pin attack or something where you've got that sort of dull ache?
Yeah, maybe. Like, I mean, I've stepped on something sharp, but I don't.
Would you like me to stick something?
No.
We can practice now. Mississippi?
Yes, I'm out.
There's 2 sensations. So the bullets that actually, I would have to caveat that I was extremely lucky that both bullets that hit me were ricochets, so they'd lost a lot of velocity, so I didn't have any exit wounds, and that's where most of the damage is done, when bullets tumble inside a body and exit. Okay. Mine sort of went in and got stuck. But it was that dull ache, sort of nauseating feeling of just it sort of knocks the wind out of you and feels just a dull ache. But I also took some shrapnel for some rocket propelled grenades, and that stings because it's hot and it's like a stinging sensation. And
but what happens is that, so just because I think for the average person listening to this, I doubt they'll have experience being shot at. Or
and we can practice now.
No, I'm good, man. It's like I don't know what you've got in your bag. You came with a big bag, but like, does it go? Yeah, does it go like? So I'm guessing, what do you first feel like a sting, and then you look down, and you realize you've been shot? I mean, how do you realize that you've just been shot? It wasn't just like an impact wound, or?
Well, personally, I was just knocked over.
Okay.
The 2 bullets hitting you knocked me backwards. The force of the impact, I suppose, and we were being engaged by I don't know, more than 10 people anyway, at quite close range, and it was I liken it to a swarm of bees. It looked like these sort of lights of stinging things sort of coming towards you. But this is
in Iraq, right?
Is in Iraq, yeah. But
2003, that was
Halloween.
Yeah, was it Halloween? Yeah,
trick or treat.
Oh my god!
But we were still being shot at, so we had to sort of extract. But because one bullet was in my left knee, or just above my left knee, every time I tried to move to get out of the
firing range,
the killing zone, as it's known,
I
kept on falling flat on my face, which was really annoying. So it took a lot longer to get out, and it sort of slowed other people down. So it put other people at risk because they were having to kind of pick me up and move me along, which is a bit.
What's going on through your head? Like, what's going through your head? Because the reason why I want to kind of spend a bit of time on unpacking this moment, because I think it's one of the things I heard you say, which I think was very humbling, was when you said, when I look back at my time in the military, what I remember most are my failures, because that's where as leaders we learn the most. And this story comes up, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was quite a key moment, I suppose, in that, moving from theory to practice.
Yeah.
And I didn't know actually at the time that the chap standing just to my right, literally less than a meter from me, had been shot in the head and sadly died instantly. And the moment we extracted from the main firing, I was thinking, oh my God, I should have, where are all my people? I didn't know where everybody was because there was so much happening. One guy had fallen into the compound and he was just making a little, space to kind of be protected and, defend himself. 3 of us went one way, which was behind a wall, and another chap, like I said, had sadly died. And as a leader, you never leave people behind, and I didn't know at that stage where everybody was. So I was thinking, oh my God, this is a nightmare.
Because this was unexpected.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
We just completed another mission, and we're moving down a street just to clear other houses to see if there were any other bombs or information that we might find. And this house looked like it was an empty house, no lights on. Gate was locked. We opened the gate and then just got engulfed in. So it was a bit of a shock, but you move on, and you learn from it, hopefully.
Yeah. And so you come back. I don't know if it's a military base. I don't know what the technical term is. You come back to base, and you look back on what just happened. What's going on through your head? Like, are you kind of assessing the different things? Are you still kind of going, I'm shot now, I need to tend to my wounds? Is it like what? Because I'm guessing one of the things is there's the physicality of it, but then I think that's often less spoken about is the mental aspect of it. What's going through your head and what you're thinking about. Are you revisiting the scenario? Are you then being haunted by those memories for like a period of time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very, very lucky, and I recognize how fortunate I am that I haven't suffered from that or the few other incidents that have happened. Seeing people blown up in front of me, and a suicide bomber exploded once on my birthday in front of me, and I've seen a lot of sort of damaged bodies and incidents happen, and I'm extremely fortunate that so far, touch wood, I haven't been affected in a way that is debilitating.
Sure.
But I'm very, very aware the signs and those that are not so fortunate.
Sure.
And I think that's why I'm throwing myself in very heavily into some of the charity work I'm doing at the moment to try and help raise awareness of mental health issues. That not all disability from service or from other things in life are physical and visible. Yeah. And it's the mental trauma that some people suffer from their service or their experiences. Doctors and nurses equally are at risk from post-traumatic stress. Yeah. And so I'm working with a charity called Combat Stress this year that's in its 100th year, set up just after the First World War as a result of shell shock issues and trying to understand what was going on in people's heads. And another charity last year called Remembered, when we had a campaign called There But Not There, where we were also trying to help raise a lot of money for a number of charities, including Combat Stress, Walking with the Wounded, Help for Heroes, to just make it more publicly understood that it's okay to not be okay. Firstly, please seek help.
Sure.
If you think you're suffering, and to make other people aware that even if the individual who's suffering doesn't actively ask for help, that others are aware that he might be or she might be struggling. I mean, this afternoon I'm after this going to a memorial service for a colleague and friend, sadly, who took his life 2 weeks ago, who served years ago. And this is happening, every day, sadly, across the country, across the world. But I said it's not just limited to military people. It's those who see trauma, and it's not even people that are necessarily on the front line. And this is another, I wouldn't say an issue, but it's something that I'm keen that people understand, that you don't have to have been physically in combat yourself to suffer from this. And I heard a story. I was living in Australia one year, and there was a chap who sort of publicly came out as suffering, severely from PTSD, and he'd just been an admin clerk in Dubai for a country that was processing bodies coffins for people who died back through Dubai and then on to their home countries. And he was just seeing coffins and processing names and paperwork. He never saw the contact, the combat, or the body itself. Yeah. But for him, that was enough to sort of cause him trouble.
Yeah, there's a friend of mine, and you won't mind me sharing the story because he talked about it in a TEDx talk that he gave, that he didn't realize at the time, but he suffered from PTSD after having seen his brother try to take his life twice.
Right.
And so that's an example of, like, he wasn't on the battlefront. He didn't have a physical injury to himself, but having witnessed something, and also people who've been abused, that can also be a sign of PTSD. That there's, and I think we've had a couple of guests on, George and James from Sanctus, both individually came. We talked a lot about mental health, and this is podcast, and we talk a lot about that.
Right.
And one thing I find that's quite similar to you and a previous guest I had that was in the military called Adam Conlon. We had one of the most popular podcasts, so let's see how well this one does. but he and you,
Mississippi,
but you and him both have this amazing ability to keep a sense of humor amidst some of the hardest times that I've come across. Like the two of you, when you tell me your stories, I always go, and there's, and I don't want. It's not about making it light. It's not about saying it did not matter and this is not important. But it's about, have you found that being able to keep a sense of humor, or being able to find ways of finding ways to cope through those difficult times helpful? Like as a leader, have you felt that that's been kind of a...
Yeah, when you're part of a team and you know each other well, piss taking and banter is just part and parcel of that. And if people didn't make fun of the most unpleasant situations, it would probably, you could get all consumed by the specific situation. I do remember, from my guys, to give an example of how nasty or amusing they were, a chap who was in my team, he was part of an incident, got blown up in Afghanistan, and luckily he survived, and he was brought into the emergency facility for treatment in the hospital in Afghanistan, and some of my guys were practicing their sort of combat medical training, sort of trauma training and stuff, so that they'd be better able to treat any of us if we were hurt.
Okay.
And so they just happened to be on the team that was supporting the main trauma team that was looking after this guy. And they didn't recognize him because he came in absolutely covered in dirt and dust and mess because he'd just been in an explosive incident. And then they suddenly recognized who he was when they started cleaning him up. And they cut all his clothes, the doctors and nurses cut all his clothes off. And then one of the guys shouted at him really loudly, "Are you cold?" And he's like, "What?" Because he can't hear because he's deaf from, he's the noise ringing in his ears from the explosion. And he repeats, "Are you cold?" And all the nurses are looking like, what the hell is going on? And he's like, "No, why?" He goes, "Because your penis is really small." and the NHS and the military doctors are like, "What the hell? Like, who are these people?" "Oh, they're his friends." Like, "Oh, right, great." But that that was just sort of a classic example of you have to kind of make light of some things. Clearly you all grieve for those you've lost, but people are so mission focused and outcomes focused that you have to just get back on the bike. And and I've sadly lost, and as many of my colleagues have, many friends over the years, and you just have to almost keep going to make sure that their loss was not in vain. It wasn't futile.
Right. So what you speak to is so important. You talk about this concept of mission. So was it clear for you when you were there, like what the mission was? Like, were you all able to align behind, like, okay, we're here for a reason. There's a purpose to what we do.
Yeah, 100%. And this is, again, as I said earlier, one of these things that translates 100% from the government space or the military space through to business. You need, I believe, fervently, that in any business you need a common purpose. You need a goal around which everybody can sort of coalesce and 100%. See where they're going. Then give the people the freedom to find ways to get there. But if you have that, some people call it a North Star. In my old company, we called it common purpose. Yeah. If you can have that, inculcate that in your people, that you have a clear shared vision, that's when things can really start to work, where your values, ideally your values, personal values, align with that of the business. Yeah. That's where really exciting things happen with your employees, giving them the feeling of value, that they are valued and that everybody's view counts. Yeah. And then, linked clearly with that is trust. You've got to trust your people and they've got to trust you to do the right thing by them and, them to be empowered by you to do the right thing for the business and for each other. And then give them that shared understanding, the context. If you want people to do the right thing, they need to understand A, where they're going, B,
why it matters,
absolutely, and that you trust them to get there, and then you can empower them to go and do it.
And almost at a third one, which is how their role directly impacts that direction.
Yeah, and this is where I coach and mentor business leaders from very large and small companies to say that encourage your teams that you may have a high level strategy, but if it's going to be relevant and achievable, you have to ensure that your people at every level understand what they can do day to day to move the needle further forward into achieving the overall team goal.
And it's been really interesting because since last year I brought on a team member, and we've been growing slowly, like a small kind of core team at the Unconventionalists, and I do a monthly review, and it's more like a reflection kind of, because I always used to think it was crazy how in my old jobs for 10 years I'd have a year appraisal, a year kind of review, or sometimes every 6 months, you'd sit down and go.
It's because it took you a year to grow your moustache.
That's it.
You're just a slow moustache grower.
100%. They're like, Mark, your ginger African sunset moustache is a little bit too,
I thought you'd have dyed
too small. Or have a transplant, right? But so we have I kind of install the system of every month we sit down. I ask them what are 3 things you're proud of? What are 3 things you've learned? What are 3 things, all this stuff. And it was really interesting. Yesterday I had one with King of the Ops, Riley. And he basically said there's this, by the time this will come out, I don't know, but anyway, there's this module that we're launching, right? Which is how to turn your mess into your message, which is effectively an online video course to help people share their story and find the message in their stories. And so I was very almost practical, particle focused. Okay, we need to get the email sequence, we need to get the website ready, no. Go and run with that. And yesterday during the appraisal, what he made me realize was that actually I didn't understand how that fitted in the bigger purpose of what we're trying to achieve here.
Yeah.
And I was I failed as a leader to go, before we get into the particles and the what, let me tell you why this matters. Let me tell you why this is going to change people's lives if they manage to go through it and do and again, going back to that vision.
Yeah, I mean, Simon Sinek, very, online, you see a lot of his work, and it's all about the why, and I buy into this 100%. If people understand why they're doing it, they will go above and beyond to help you achieve it. If they don't understand what's the point, why are they doing this? People will do what they're told to do, not what they could do. Why is 100% critical.
Did you find yourself, without going into specific details, but did you find yourself at points leading teams where there were members of that team where you were clearly going, I'm not sure you're aligned here, I'm not sure you're here for the right reason, I'm not sure you get it? Or would you say it was a constant kind of everybody aligned all the time?
No, it's not. And you have to, as a leader, recognize that, even if you have a selection process, for example, or you have your interview process and you only select people for your business or your team that have met the standard, there are going to be people who just meet the standard and those who, crush it. And there's always going to be a differences of capability and, just general, the way they do business in any team. And I know that it's one of my failings as a leader. I'm not as tolerant as I should be, or patient as I should be with those who sometimes haven't got on board quickly enough. Because
you have an expectation of them, you're this is where
that. And if there's particularly Afghanistan, I commanded led a number of international teams, and would be sent individuals by countries over whom I had no control of their selection. They were just sent to me as, this is going to be your person for doing X or Y, and that can be quite challenging when they're there. In some cases, people get paid quite handsomely and tax free for being overseas. We never did, so it was never about the money for us. And it was frustrating occasionally where you had people who were doing the bare minimum just to kind of keep safe for their 12 months, get their big bonus check and go home. And I know I need to do better, continue to do better at bringing more people with me in any leadership role to make sure that the whole team comes, rather than going, I'll give you a chance, you fail, do it. Out.
Yeah. It's interesting. I saw a talk by a Japanese entrepreneur, and she basically explained that 50% of the longest lasting business in the world are all Japanese. And so she explained it's because in Japan, they have a family business culture whereby people who work in the company eventually can be adopted as their actual kids. Right? It's crazy. And she said it's because if your kids come back with a bad report, you wouldn't fire them, right? You'd probably try and understand what's happened, and so they try and approach the business the same way, that before going, it's your fault. And I think Jocko Willink, you know who he is? He's the author of Extreme Ownership, I I think it's called Extreme Ownership, and the Dichotomy of Leadership. Anyway, he talks about how every problem you have in an organization is a leadership problem. If you understand that, then you take responsibility for everything, and then it becomes your responsibility to fix it and to kind of come up with ways, etc. So anyway, the point being is instead of going, I'm going to fire you, let me take the time to understand what's happening, do what I need to do, and then if it just doesn't work, then we just part ways.
I think authority, accountability, and responsibility are three things that leaders need to think very carefully about. What are they ultimately responsible for? Who is going to be held accountable for actions, etc., and who has the authority to make decisions? And one of the things I've enjoyed doing over the last few years, and when I'm working and coaching leaders, is a decision-making exercise where you say, Mark, so what decisions as a leader have you made? The last 5 decisions. Write down the last 5 decisions you made, or 10 decisions. And then physically get them to write them down. And then say, right, of those decisions, why did you make them? Is it because there's a legal requirement, a regulatory requirement? You were told by your predecessor these are the decisions you make? Or is it just easier because you have the information to make them quickly and therefore it's just easier? What could you actually have delegated, even one level down to some other people in your team? And then what do you think that would have made them feel like? If they saw the boss give them a decision that previously had been held at a higher level, you feel valued, you feel trusted. And you may take a bit of support and coaching of that junior to kind of have the right information to make the right decision, but you can shadow them for a while. And then if you do that, to one level down to your subordinates, and then they start doing that very quickly across the entire organization, you have a much deeper level of engagement by people who are trying to think about how they can help the business progress. And then interestingly, the sort of second phase of that is to get your subordinates and your superiors, if you're in the middle, to say what decisions they think you make. And of those decisions, what decisions do they think they could do on your behalf, given the right support and stuff. And it's fascinating when people actually are forced to think. And I went to one company and the leader said, I don't make any decisions. And everyone looked at him and said, you're joking, right? He's like, no, I mean, you all come to me and ask me what I think, but, you're ultimately making the decision. It's like, no, that is you saying what decision you want to be made, and then they go and act on
100%.
it. And he just wasn't aware that actually that 30-second conversation by the coffee machine was the decision-making process, but he just wasn't aware of it.
Because it's Reinventing Organizations. I don't know if you read that book. And it's really interesting to look at, especially because you come from the military background, where you look at that kind of organizations red, and then you go into the blue and teals and that kind of stuff. And I really want to dive a bit more into the organizational work, because I think there's lots of really kind of interesting topics that we have. Before we do that, I just want to go back to what you said, because when I was looking through the research, you got involved with a lot of cross-country relationship, a lot of people with different stakes, different kind of egos, or whatever you want to call it, different like personalities, interests, agendas. And you were like key in a lot of these kind of cross-country relationships. What did you learn?
The importance of empathy. I know I get this wrong often still today, and I will probably do in the future, but the importance of cultural empathy particularly, that taking time to listen and understand the perspective of those individuals with whom you have to work, whether you like them or not, it's irrelevant. If you are in a position where you have to engage with these people, whether they're ministers in a foreign government or leaders of businesses where they might have questionable personal morals or values, if you have to engage with them, it's taking time to understand and find ways to make it work. And I certainly found in Afghanistan over those years that I was there, that taking time to understand everybody from, when I used to visit one of the ministries every day, pretty much, the guy who was watering the plants, who had no teeth and couldn't read or write, but a lovely chap. And we'd smile and chat and sort of have ask how his family were, etc., all the way through all the guards going up to the minister or the deputy minister who I was meeting. And the point being that because I used to go on my own, generally with one interpreter, linguist who was unarmed. And so if there was an attack on that building, I needed to rely on them for my protection and vice versa. And there was this mutual respect. And one of the just funny sort of vignettes, I suppose, of demonstrating very visibly that you trust people and how far that goes. I was at a meeting in northern Afghanistan for an election thing once, and there were international troops from Europe. And they were providing the perimeter security for this building, for this conference. That was an Afghan conference, but they had a few senior generals attending. And you weren't allowed to take your rifle in the building for the conference for security reasons. And the minister's bodyguard team, that were all Afghan, were outside the building there with their rifles. And I needed to go into the meeting. So when they said, you're going to have to give your weapon to somebody, and I gave it to the Afghan to look after, not the international Western coalition who you'd assume would be the natural people that just changed everything in terms of them seeing how much I trusted them to do the right thing. And
what does trust mean to you?
It's absolutely critical to everything, and I know that some people find, trusting hard, and, to trust, if you can trust people, you have to actually trust them first. And we did I've done a lot of work with companies where we talk about how to build trust and how to repair trust if it's broken. And it's a cycle, and you have to think carefully about what it was that has caused you to either be an untrusting person or to lose trust in someone, and then work hard to think about how you can both repair that, but it's doable.
Is trust always repairable, do you think?
I think a lot of it is, but in some cases, clearly extreme cases, not. Or it's going to be too hard, or it's not worth the effort to do it if it's not directly impacting your personal, your business life. So you
leave this career after 22 years and learning and going across international, because you spent some time in America, North America, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, you've spent Middle East, Southeast Asia, and you go and join a consultancy group. And what was your first impression of trying to apply what you'd learned and what you'd seen and experienced over the last 22 years suddenly into the, is it commercial sector, private sector? No, I don't know what.
Commercial, private.
Yeah, commercial sector and businesses. What was the surprising thing that came up for you?
The surprising thing is probably not what you'd expect, is that so much of it was identical.
Yeah.
The challenges were identical for leaders. The nomenclature was different, of who the different parties or stakeholders are or were, but the challenges are near identical. We all suffered in the government space. I'll say suffered. We all experienced the change in environment from what had hitherto in the sort of Cold War era or the sort of 70s, 80s, fairly predictable, conventional kind of environment that was complicated. We found with the information age in, fighting terrorism in the Middle East that suddenly things were much more complex and by their very nature, therefore, unpredictable. And we had to change entirely our mindset and leadership behaviors to adapt in the face of complexity, and rather than seeing complexity as a threat or a risk, trying to find opportunity in that complexity. And that's the same with business. There were the number of network disruptors that there are now, back in the day, Airbnb versus hotels, or Uber versus taxis, that are now obviously being disrupted by the next thing and the next thing. There will always be that networks disrupting sort of angle, I think, to business and to life in general. Things are not going to slow down.
Sure.
And so I think for me, the biggest lesson or thing that I took away was how similar.
Yeah. You were surprised? Were you surprised by that? Like,
I'm not sure if I was surprised or not really. It was just an observation.
Yeah.
I guess maybe surprised how similar some of the I guess I was surprised actually that in business, how when I talked to more and more leaders, the challenges they said they were facing as leaders. Yeah. Like, okay, and we come from different backgrounds, but we can work this through.
Right. Yeah, I love it, and I love how you can actually bring the similar challenges that you have around leadership, common purpose, mission, and a lot of things you talk about as well as culture and adaptive teams.
Yeah.
What makes up an adaptive team?
Sort of a high performing or an adaptable team is one that has all those components, the capabilities of having the trust, the common vision of what it is the team's trying to achieve, and particularly if it then has to fit into an environment with other teams. We referred to it at the time, the consultancy I was with, and the methodology we learned in combat was team of teams. You are a team and you can be successful, but it's largely irrelevant if you either had information that could help the team to your left or your right.
Right. Don't hoard
information. And that is, we see that everywhere in business. Teams are very successful individually within a larger enterprise, but they could actually share some of that knowledge or the information across their teams and the culture. And
do you think that some companies have a culture of making teams compete against themselves?
Yeah.
And then you have the meritocracy system of we reward those who do very well. Yeah. And therefore, if you want to get the reward, if you want to get the award, if you want to get the bonus, then you have to do very well, and it'll be detriment if you help others. I mean, do you think there's a bit of that?
No, we see that a lot.
Yeah.
And different sectors have different, degrees of that.
Yeah.
But I think it's. Yeah, it can be an issue, and we I've talked to companies about how they think about rewarding, good behavior or positive outcomes, and I think we were certainly, it was drilled into us that if we were successful on a mission, it was not irrelevant, but it was largely irrelevant if we had information or assets or resources that we could have helped others be successful as well. So it's all about the team, thinking about others before yourself, and that goes back to leadership principles. At the military academy in Sandhurst, where all British officers have to learn for a year, the motto is serve to lead. You're serving others first and foremost. You're a servant leader, and I think the leaders in business that I see doing best are those that, when I speak to them and their employees, are the ones who take time to understand their people, and they feel that they care.
Yeah.
They've got the empathy to connect with their people.
100%. And there's something that I've found, and I don't know if you've found this when you work in an organization that you do, but a lot of the time, the organization, and especially in leadership, will say, here are our values. Here's who we are.
Yeah.
Like, we are authentic, we're transparent, you know, we're community-based, with all this stuff. And then you dive a little bit deeper and you talk to people in the organization and they'll be like, we're none of that.
Yeah.
We don't live that in any kind of way. Like, what's been your experience with that, I guess? And then what's the kind of tips you have for people listening to this to go, here's a blind spot that you might not be aware of, and here's what you need to know about it.
Yeah, if your values or your mission statement or your vision is just a mouse mat or a poster, it's kind of missing the point. It's a start. It's good that you've thought about things. Yeah. But they have to be real. They have to be living things. Your people have to go to work every day knowing that when they take action or do something in the business, that it is in line with those things. And they've got to feel that it's a real thing actually that they can contribute to as well. So when we talk about people thinking of developing strategies, think about asking those at the bottom, in all the levels, but particularly ask the people at the bottom when you're crafting your strategy for their input. Because if you come up with a nice high-level strategy, which looks nice on a mouse mat or a poster,
or a mug,
but it's complete, or a mug. But if it's completely undeliverable by those who you're expecting to deliver it, then they'll just be thinking, no one's actually bothered to ask me. If they'd asked me, I've been here 25 years, I could tell them what's worked in the past or whatever. So engage broadly when you're thinking about these things, because everyone loves to be asked their opinion and advice.
But do you used to do that in the military? Because that sounds almost counterintuitive. That I would imagine the military is more like, here's our strategy and we're going to go and do this. And
the high level strategy generally is set, but certainly in a lot of the teams I've been in, we made a point of asking everybody, you'd give your view as the leader what you thought would be the best way to achieve it, and then you say, right, anybody got any other ideas? And that was a little bit shocking. Some, from having come from some of my teams that were very conventional and hierarchical, to then saying, right, any ideas from others, thinking that there'd just be a bit of silence and you'd move on. And they go, that's a shit plan, boss. Like, okay, thanks for that. Why is it not a great plan? And as long as people have a sensible or constructive reason why, then as a leader, again, I think one of the things you need to have as a leader is to be able to have the humility, absolutely, and to be able to quickly pick out those things that are valuable. And discard those that may be interesting and relevant, but not actually going to change things fundamentally.
No, 100%. And there's this. I have no idea where this question came from. It just popped in my head. What's a film that you would say depicts a real picture of what it's like to be on the battlefield or in the army or in the military? Is there a film that? Because I'm sure there must be films you must be looking at and going, oh, that would never happen, or that is so not going to happen. Is there a film that comes to mind?
I suppose. Saving Private Ryan, that first scene of going onto the beaches where there's just the chaos of people are falling around you, that can be very much people's experience in a gun battle. That's not ideally and hopefully most of your experience when you're in uniform, but that sort of, I think, was quite an accurate depiction of certainly how I felt when things were when the bullets are just flying from everywhere and you're just thinking, God, how can I actually get out of this and do the right thing. I think that in terms of combat, that's probably one of the ones.
Cool.
Yeah.
I want to go back to culture really quickly. So culture. So you go in an organization and people say we want to have a high performing culture. We want to, we want to be results driven. And I don't know if you saw it, but Google did a study around Aristotle. They call it Aristotle Project, and they're basically the 5 most effective attributes of a team. And the number 1 was psychological safety. Right. That basically that you have the trust that when you raise your hand and you raise an issue, then people will not judge you, not reprimand you, not make fun of you. And I guess it goes back a bit to trust, right? What we've seen a bit
it's
before.
part and parcel of trust. I mean, again, I talked to a lot of businesses about psychological safety, and initially people think this is a fluffy thing that is just we don't really want to. That sounds a bit new age and whatever, but it is when you think about what it means to be able to make mistakes and be supported through them. Clearly, if you continue to make silly mistakes over and over, that's not acceptable. But if you are trying to push the envelope innovatively within a sector, within a company, in a business, and you're encouraging your people to think how they can make things better, then you have to accept that things will get broken a little bit on the way. And I think those disruptors that are trying to think always about a better way or a new idea will make mistakes. And we didn't have the luxury when we were fighting in Iraq in those early days of thinking very deliberately about a long-term plan about how we could change the way we did our business.
Yeah.
And so we had to, it's an overused phrase, but we had to, build the aircraft in flight because the enemy was there every day and we were going out to try and defeat the enemy every day. And so we had to accept that if we wanted to learn quickly, we would make mistakes on the way, but we had to fail fast was the phrase. Sure. So, accept that you've taken off and then someone's gone, oh crap, there's no wings. Anyone know how to make wings? And then you just, you work through it.
Yeah.
But we, when we went to Iraq, we went very much with a conventional or rather a traditional sort of hierarchical mindset. We were a big coalition looking for an enemy that had been predominantly, a hierarchy as well, only to find that, the terrorist organizations that we found ourselves engaging with were anything but that.
Yeah.
And we knew, we found out who some of the key players were, and we would go, right, we'll go and try and arrest or take that guy off the battlefield. And then in our minds, we'd drawn a hierarchy saying, well, if he's subordinate to this guy, then by definition, there must be that he must be there and have this sort of team. And we were drawing wire diagrams or org charts in our head, looking for the next person in the chain, only to find that every time we went out to get the next person, the entire structure seemingly had changed. Or they'd say, oh, yeah, you got the right house, but he left 2 days ago. So, wrongly, we thought, oh, damn it, we're just too slow. If we just sped up by 2 days, we would get him. I'm not understanding that because this information age, everyone having the mobile phones,
they could say, hey, we saw a troop coming over.
Every time we did one mission, they'd all call each other and say, hey, they just took out Mark.
Yeah.
He's gone to jail. Yeah. Leave or go to ground or whatever. Yeah. So the faster we interacted with that network, which we didn't realize was a network, they changed faster. So we were actually making it harder for ourselves. So changing the way we did our business, we aligned every 24 hours with a big video call, and we were able, without really any increase in numbers of people or equipment, go from 1 raid a week to 10 raids a night. And that started to, actually make a difference.
And like, how do you feel about the world today, like especially after having spent so much time in, counterterrorism and trying to, all that kind of stuff? And what we see, on the media that's being portrayed and like this kind of whole image around the world and how it's threatening and dangerous and terrorist. Like, do you still keep an optimism about life and the world?
100%. I mean, I think, as I sort of alluded to earlier, that I think we are all guilty. I'll say all. I'm lumping everyone into a bucket there myself. A lot of people are guilty, and a lot of nations are guilty, or communities of just a blanket statement or an assumption about a particular group of people. A nation is they're all extremists or whatever, which is just so unfair and wrong. And I think therefore we can all do with a much bigger dose of empathy and tolerance, and recognize that while there are absolutely very, very serious threats about which we should be concerned, we should not lump everybody into those baskets, because we risk turning more people against the communities actually that they would love to be part of fully. So as I said, I've got some of my closest friends are from countries that traditionally have been conflict zones, or have individuals who've done various terrorist acts. So I think empathy is key, and just understanding. We need all even don't want to get onto Brexit at all, but we all need a bit more understanding and empathy about other views. Yeah,
100%. And you can totally get about Brexit. This is show about everything.
I don't want to go there. We've only got I don't know how long. Cool. Mississippi.
Yeah. This should be like a new theme with guests. So talk about friends. When I Google your name, Bear Grylls comes up like on one of the photos. Like, did you guys train together, or did you go in the army together, or is
no? We've known each other a long time.
Oh, okay.
And so our families know each other, and
cool. All right, leave it at Mississippi.
But he does a lot of great work for supporting charities, and with the Scouts, I think that's a very positive thing that he does with them. Giving kids all over the world a way to learn skills that might be useful in life, and teaching them kindness and never giving up and stuff. And that it does feed very much into some of the work I do with my charities.
Cool. So are we going to expect you one day to be on this survival show and go into like Alaska and have to wrestle a bear with your bare hands?
Who knows?
Who knows? So listen, Ash, we're coming towards the end of the interview. I've got a few last questions. One of them is, if you could whisper a message to the ears of leaders around the world listening to this podcast, people starting at their business, whether a one-woman or one-man band, or they're leading an organization with hundreds of people, what would you want to tell them? What would you want them to know about their responsibility as leaders and taking care of their people?
I think given that the world is such a complex place, and every sector that I have worked in is equally complex, is to understand and accept that it's okay to not know all the answers as a leader. You're not expected to have every answer to everything. You are expected to listen, though. So active listening and empathy with your teams and maintaining that connection.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you as a leader should hire the smartest people to do the things that you need them to do.
Mm-hmm.
You're not expected, and they would not expect you to try and control everything. So be comfortable as a leader to, you know, have the understanding of where your people's strengths are. Know that you absolutely do value them.
Mm-hmm.
Because that feeling of value, I think, is fundamental to everything. If you feel that people don't care, you will, and you may have been in businesses like this, where you sort of start to disengage quite quickly with the company. Yeah. But if you believe that, you know, in our case, if you get wounded, that they're going to look after you and your family, that allows you to go out day after day and, you know, go beyond the extra mile, you know, to do the right thing for the company.
Yeah. Appreciate that. Brother, before I ask you my final two questions, I want to acknowledge you. First of all, it's so good to see you again. I mean, it's been ages. Every time I see you, it's always like a big smile. But I think you've got such a great energy about you, and also like the mission that you're trying to do now, and going and doing some consulting, some coaching, some speaking as well, because you also do speaking. We didn't talk about that. But to try and basically share what you've learned over the last 22 years of trying to help nations and people coming together and kind of fighting enemies, and, you know, whatever that metaphor is. And that you're now spending your time and dedicating that with business leaders and teams and helping people build trust and community and high-performing cultures. I think it's really, really cool. And I'm very excited to see like where you're going to go with it, and hopefully we'll have some work together. What's one thing that most people don't know about you?
Well, you've already outed me with the choir boy stuff. I'm an artist.
Yeah.
I do painting and drawing. That's been not many people know that.
Really?
I'm a terrible soccer player.
Well, you were Harlequin FC senior.
No, that was rugby.
Oh, is it? Right. Okay.
It's football, terrible.
Okay.
Most racket sports, not great.
Yeah. Cool. Do you
yeah,
still paint? Do you still draw? And
not as much as I'd like.
Yeah.
But I do it for presents, for gifts for people.
Okay.
So I like sort of personalizing things. So if I have the time, you know, and somebody is getting married, a friend of mine got married years ago, and so I did a painting of the church they got married in, for example. Little things like that.
Very cool, man. Very cool. If I could give you a kind of the billboard on Piccadilly Circus, you know, Piccadilly Circus, like the digital kind of boards when you come out of the tube station around the fountain, and you could have 3 truths that you'd like to share with people, that they'd walk every day and watch them and see them, what would those 3 truths be?
You put me on the spot there. Give me an example of something you're thinking of.
So let me rephrase that. So let's say, because I used to use this question years ago. I got it from Lewis Howes, and it's effectively this: like, imagine it's your last day on Earth, right? So everything you've ever built is going to be erased. Everything that you've ever shared is gone. But you get to write down 3 truths that you've learned about life that you want to pass on. You know, whether that's to your kids, to your friends, to the people behind you. That what you've learned about life and about this one life that you've had. What would those 3 truths be?
I'd say probably number 1 is have courage. You know, and I've got a young daughter, and I want her to have the courage always to make the right choices and be brave enough, you know, particularly if friend groups or the people are doing things that are not right, to have the courage to actually be able to say, look, no, I'm not doing this, and stand by that. Be kind. Again, something I need to do more of. You know, taking time to make sure that you look for the best in people always. You know, having courage and be kind. Actually, and I've thought about these things for a long time, and then I watched a film with my daughter and realised that it's something that comes out of Cinderella. So I'm not sure whether that says something about me or not. But Cinderella's father said, "Have courage and be kind." I thought, "Oh damn, that's." I didn't steal it from there, but now that it's slightly compromised.
That. Yeah.
And never give up.
Yeah,
I suppose. Maybe not the truth, but you know, just there's always a way out.
Yeah.
If you just stop and take bite-sized chunks, you know, small steps.
Yeah.
You know, nothing is. You know, I've been in a number of things in my life where they felt at times to be overwhelming, and then you just have to slow down and just think of, right, let's take one step at a time, and it'll all be okay.
Cool. Final question: what does being unconventional mean to you?
That's your second final question.
I know. I keep on at it. What does unconventional mean to you?
For me, unconventional really, so my own experience and what I encourage others to be is to think differently. Don't accept the status quo as being the way things have to be. Always be the person who's trying to think about other ways or innovative ways of doing things that might be the one thing that no one else has thought of. So be creative and innovative.
Love that. Where can people find you? People want to work with you, find more about you?
The website, egmnet.net. I'm on Instagram, Ash Alex Cooper, Twitter. And
have you got a YouTube channel? Did you say before?
I have a YouTube channel. EGM Network.
EGM Network. Yeah, you're gonna have.
You can find me. I'm all over.
When are you going to be sharing that video you showed me before?
That'll be in July on the anniversary of that day in the office.
Okay, cool. So people check out in July. There's going to be a really hot video. Ash, brother, thank you so much for coming, man.
Thanks,
really appreciate it. It was awesome.
Okay.
And all the best.
Thank you very much.